Okay, let's go ahead and start. Thanks for being flexible. We will definitely be done on time, but I usually like to start on time, but looks like we're missing at least one, if not two folks. So, this is a new type of session. I don't think that we've offered one of these in elementary before, but this course is going to be an article discussion. So I know that there were a couple of things that I had you read for tonight. I think my goal for this particular series is that we spend more of our time collectively talking and learning and engaging together. I definitely don't have all of the answers, but I'm really interested and I learn a lot after reading articles, especially when hearing what other people are taking away and what other people are applying to their classroom practice and stuff like that. So I think my purpose for offering a course like this is so that we can kind of vary our teaching style or learning style too. We spent a lot of time first semester talking about pedagogy, and now I think there's like another layer that we can dig into both as like learners and as leaders. So I'm excited that y'all are in this course. I'm excited to dig into these readings from tonight and just hear what you have to say, what you think about them, how you feel like they're applicable to your classroom and stuff like that. Ideally, I would like to do this without a PowerPoint, but I don't know if I'll ever actually get there. But this PowerPoint only has a few slides on it. Just a couple of things because this is our first session. This is kind of the way that I've laid out this series. We're going to start by talking about identity. Our next session is going to be connected to academics, and then our third session is going to be connected to discipline. However, if there's something that you feel like along the lines of these topics that you want to discuss further that's not listed here, or a particular aspect of any of these three things, please let me know. I'm definitely open to adjusting, looking for new things for us to read and stuff like that. So I do want to know what you're interested in reading and talking about too. So the other thing, would love to hear a little bit more about you. I don't know if y'all know each other or not, but would love for us to share out loud. I put a couple of questions or prompts on the screen. And I think the last one's the most important. What's one thing about you that's not connected to being a teacher or not connected to your classroom, and not connected to just, I'm originally from wherever. So if you want to take a minute, go ahead and think about those. Otherwise, if somebody's ready, feel free to unmute and go ahead and share.
I'm Capricia. I know both of you. I teach at Boyd Elementary, second grade. One thing that's going well this year, first quarter, and then now found out first semester, my students have grown the most in math in my grade, which is awesome. And one thing about me, I've been getting back in the gym and I've been going almost every day for about a month now, so I'm pretty proud of myself.
I'm Hannah. I work at Vidalia Elementary, first grade. This year, what's going well? They're growing a lot. Yeah. I play the violin. I guess that's not connected to my teacher self.
Awesome. Okay, it's going to be both of us for a little while. I taught kindergarten in Moorhead, which is now part of Sunflower County Consolidated School District. One thing going well, obviously, like I'm not teaching, but I'll skip that one. One thing not connected to education, I have this like, you probably know this already, but this like semi-creative outlet that I really like to pretend that I'm practicing a lot or whatever, in terms of like hand lettering, I guess is what it's called. So I spend a lot of time just like scribbling and writing words across my notebook as I'm like listening to phone calls or listening to people talk. I like write the words that they're saying, and in like a really weird way. So that is something that I enjoy doing, not connected to work or family or things like that. A couple of commitments, again, because this is a different type of professional development. things that I think are really important to me: eliminate distractions. So like if you have the TV on, like on mute behind you or something like that. Most of the time, we also know, like you can tell if somebody's like not looking at their screen a lot. Engage fully, come prepared, which does mean doing the readings, and embracing change. And really that's just there to attempt something that you're interested in trying after each session. So we're not asking for any like drastic changes each time, but attempting, one of the ideas that you're taking away from each session. Anything that we're missing? Anything else that you feel like we should add? Okay. That's pretty much already there. Let's be like super honest, because I know you also didn't have as much time as you normally would to do the reading because this was our first session. So tell me where you're at with the pre-readings, because that'll impact how much we go into either of those two readings in terms of our discussion. So no judgments, but it's most helpful if you're honest.
I got to page 5 on the article, and I did not read the book.
Okay.
I have them printed, and I've read the first section on the article.
Okay. Dang, that makes me so sad because I think the article is really good. Have either of you read it before? Okay. I wasn't sure if it like came up at Institute or it was like one of the optional readings for pre-Institute work. I know that like feels like light years away too. But it comes up a lot. Actually, it's pre-work that I have for a call that I have next week. So it's like just like being filtered through lots of different aspects. The chapter is so good. So we can talk about that a little bit. But it's also a really fast read. Have either of you heard of the book Black Ants and Buddhists? Okay, Hannah, you have. Capricia, I have the whole thing scanned illegally. If you want it, it's so good. It is my favorite book study book, and I've done it every year, and I just hadn't done it this year because I always do it. And I kind of felt like we're getting in a little bit of a rut with it, but there's still some like really relevant chapters that come up.
I read, I think you suggested it. I read Multiplication is for White Children. I'm pretty sure you're the one who told me to read it, and I read it. It was really good. So yeah, send it my way.
Yes, that's also a good one. This one is, I think you'll really like this one now that you're in the classroom because it's so focused to lower elementary too. And the author was a first and second grade teacher for the longevity of her teaching career. So it's all examples from her classroom too, and they're just so relevant. I feel like when you're teaching that, so good. But more will come up over the course of this series. We can talk about like limiting it a little bit more if you feel like that's too much, or if you now feel like, okay, I have 2 weeks to do some of the reading, so maybe that's a little bit more manageable, whatever. I'll take your lead for that. So we can talk about that. Let's start with the article. If you have it or want to pull it up, or I can pull it up on my screen too. Just anything that stands out in terms of that article. With whatever you read, what are you thinking about?
Well, from the very little bit I read, the whole purpose is talking about how teachers should be culturally competent, right? Like how culture affects the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess I didn't read that much, but it's what I got from what I've read. But I actually was talking to my friend about this recently because he was like, well, after your 2 years, if you don't stay in Mississippi, are you still going to teach? And I was just saying how I'm not sure because teaching somewhere else would be so different because of the culture here. And I was like, I go to a school where they sing Never Would Have Made It at their Christmas play, or they like everyone does Christmas in my classroom, or the fact that all of my students are Black. I was like going somewhere else, like Vegas, my nephew's class, he's the only Black kid in his class and everyone else is Mexican. So it's like a whole different dynamic. And it'd just be different as a teacher. I feel like I'd be learning how to teach again because it's a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think of the service learning project we have to do. Second years, we have to do a leadership project. So it made me think of that.
Hannah, as we go through this, I would like to hear more about your ideas of what you're doing or what you want to do or whatever. But I'm not going to put you on the spot tonight by any means. But I am thinking about that as it relates to this course too, and you know, like, are there parallels and stuff like that? I think there's like some potential for the book to have a lot of like parallels. So if you are interested in even skimming that, I think that would be helpful too, if you need ideas or thinking about like what's most applicable for your students too. So the whole premise behind the article is like, what is culturally relevant teaching? What is this type of pedagogy that is so relevant for students of color? And like, why is that? Why is this, you know, like a focus point? What are examples of people that are doing this? And so that's kind of like what is setting us up for this particular course. And then the book is giving lots of examples of how somebody goes into a classroom in which there are lots of different cultures and ethnicities represented, and how she leverages student identity, leverages, you know, like students succeeding, leverages parents, families, and communities, and all of those things to helping students see how important they are, how valuable their background is, lots of things. There's so many examples there. So the thing that I take away from this article, for the most part, it's different every time I read it, but is this idea of like, that's just good teaching. It's connected to who we're teaching, you know? So the fact that, like Capricia, you said, your students, you're teaching in a way that is like empowering them, that's showing them like all of the like wonderful things that they can accomplish, that's like maybe building up their confidence, that's doing all of these things in a way that's directly connected to their identity, their backgrounds, their community, like all of those kinds of things. This child is like going crazy next to me. I'm so sorry. Apparently she does not want to sit here. So that's the background, I think, of the article. We won't necessarily like dig into that anymore. What I do think would be relevant though is, let me open the link for the book. I think it's actually going to be important for us to take just a few minutes to read even the very beginning, because then I want us to talk about like how student identity plays a big role in their educational life.
Can I say something about the article?
Yes, please.
Well, I have a student. I really like the part where the students could bring in rap lyrics, and they talked about poetry, but they also talked about certain things in English. You know, we could talk about verbs, nouns. I have a student who says she wants to be Cardi B, and she isn't very interested in school. So I'm thinking about doing something like that for her. And yeah, so I like that.
Okay, so there's lots of stories and anecdotes and such throughout this book. So there's one particular story that I want us to read. Okay, I can put the link in the chat if that's the easiest. But I want us to read page 63. I think it start with the first paragraph on 63. and then go down to the bottom of 64. So really it's 2 pages of this particular text. When you're done, go ahead and just put in the chat box that you're done. Okay, would love to hear your thoughts or reactions to that. Not necessarily connecting to your classroom yet, because I know that these are going to be some very like hard connections to make potentially, but just thoughts or reactions to the like story or anecdotes.
Well, for me, when the teacher first decided to go ahead and have, oh my gosh, their names, the two refugees come into her classroom, I was like, that's really cool, but I also kind of felt like the social worker in the situation, like, well, what are they gonna do if like your kids can't even talk to them? But also it's a risk because they're not sure. They didn't know much about the refugees at the time. So it's also, I was like, I'd be like, I want to help, but like my kids, I don't know how that's gonna work out. I don't really know them like that kind of a situation. But I found it was really cool, like even by the end, like to see how empathetic students can be. And that's something that I thought about even in my own classroom, how the student was like, well, you're safe now, you're with us at the very end. After all of that, they kind of have got to learn and hear about what's going on and what they've been through. And I think that part sticks out the most to me because I'm always amazed with how empathetic my students can be with each other, even when I feel like some days I'm like, dude, you have no real feelings for other people, and then you're amazed when you see them do it for someone else.
I would say the same thing. I really liked that part because I know as a first grade teacher, I'm like, well, I'm teaching them all this stuff, but do they actually know what I'm saying or anything? And they do. They really like learning about people and they really care for people. And they're like, oh, you're sad. Well, I want to help you. And it's really sweet. And I liked that part.
Okay, sorry. No more baby. Okay, so that was really helpful. I just think that this is like such a good story. Now connected to your classroom. I'm not saying that you are in a position in which there are you have connections even or that there are refugees like in your particular town or whatever. But any connections that can be made to your classroom that you hadn't thought of or that this is making you think about.
Well, it makes me think about the access part, I think, on the wheel thing that we use for TFA. I don't know what the wheel's called anymore, but there's an access section on it. So it makes me think that I need to work harder to find ways to give my students more access to the communities, whether it's through meeting people who can just share their stories with them or bringing in people who are community leaders and things like that.
Um, I'm having a community helpers day. First grade and kindergarten is my community helpers day, and that's part of my leadership project. But I really like that the teacher was positive and just invited them and was like, well, I'll find them something to do because I wanted to have parents come in, but I'm nervous to have parents. And I'm like, well, what if I don't have anything for them to do? Or I don't know. It's really hard for me to let someone come in and see my classroom. So I really liked that. But I wish I was like that and had more parents come in to help.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I think is really interesting about this is I feel like just on a whim, she was like, oh, I know that Carmen is a middle child with lots of siblings. So I know that it's probably hard for her to have somebody that she's like, you know, getting like one-on-one attention from. So this is like a very quick connection that I can make. And I think the thing that strikes me about just these 2 pages is her level of understanding about probably every student in her classroom, that she knows and understands them to that extent. I remember thinking like at Christmas time, like I hardly know a couple of kids, like they don't do anything wrong. They are pretty quiet. They, like do what's asked, and never like, I don't know, never get attention like in like overly positive or overly negative, I guess. And I remember thinking like, gosh, what do I know about them? What do they like? Like, like those kinds of things. So it strikes me, knowing the level to which she knows and understands each of her students. This particular article or chapter, I mean, sorry, shows how she gets there. Basically, at the end of the chapter, it talks about how she does home visits with every single student as early as possible, and things that may or may not be feasible, but she makes a point to invite people into her classroom. She makes a point to like sit down one-on-one with parents and families, whether that's in their home or in like her classroom at the end of the day or whatnot, to like get to know them, to understand that like Carmen has 6 siblings or whatever she has, like things like that. Which I just think is like it's so striking, because there's so many things that teachers have to do, and she for sure makes this a priority. So the other thing that I think is really interesting is that she invites people into her classroom and she's like, I don't have a plan necessarily, but why don't you sit and read with the student? And Hannah, I think it's really important that you had said we're having a community helpers day, which there is more about that, how she like goes into that later in this chapter too. So you might want to check that out. But even thinking, okay, how can I invite people in during a time of day in which maybe it's not the best for me? Maybe it centers because kids are like at lots of different tables. So maybe if there are other adults in the room, even just assisting or even just keeping them like at their table sometimes, maybe that would help. And maybe that would allow parents to know more about what we're doing in the class. Not expecting them to like, you're not coming in to like teach 5 kids how to read, but just sitting, listening to them, like being a listening ear in the library center or things like that. Maybe that's relevant. Maybe that'll be helpful. And maybe parents would be interested if they were invited to come in, as opposed to like waiting for them to volunteer, or things like that. I don't know. Just ideas and suggestions, not like this is what you should be doing, because all of these things I never did in my classroom either. Lots of things in which I have regrets about. Oh, the community helpers would be awesome. I wish, parents and grandparents had been invited in on a regular basis and stuff like that. I'm just going to like talk through some other components in this chapter, because I think there's a lot of good stuff in this. Like I said, I think the whole book is so good. But like Hannah, like I said, there's the community helper piece. So she goes through like who she invites in and how she tries to not be selective about it, but she also tries to like focus on people that are in positions involving STEM careers, particularly women, because she found that a lot of the girls in her classroom didn't see themselves in like a career like that. So that was an important aspect for her. She also kind of keeps a running list of things that that she knows or that she meets, and things that they like have as hobbies or occupation or lifestyles, just so that she can see variations, to help, like make that more varied for students in her classroom. There's another part in this chapter about answering questions with more questions. So if students raise a question, she doesn't want students to feel like she's the one with all the answers, that they don't know things. So when they ask, she tells them. So she raises questions like, oh, I'm not sure. Where do you think we could find that information? So leading them to the library, leading them to doing research on the computer, leading them to like asking other people who might know those things because they, like have a background in it or whatever. But helping students understand that they know a lot and they can find the information or find somebody who knows the information, and that they don't see it as, like being all on her, or that she's the one that knows everything. I'm trying to think of any of the other stories that would be relevant here. There, like I said, just so much good stuff in this book, in this whole chapter too. Mystery Math Guess is another good one. That's where she also connects the women in STEM careers. But similarly, bringing guests in, and then they try and figure out what that person does for a career based on like information that they share. Which is cool because the students are an active participant as opposed to just sitting and listening. The last thing that's really cool about this book, you can skim through it and find this, but there's lots of places in which she's like, here are great texts connected to this topic. This particular chapter has a partial list of visitors over the years, and she kind of just runs through those. Also field trips over the years, she includes that there too. So if it's like boxed in here, it's where she's like kind of organizing notes and ideas. You don't really have to read the whole chapter to be able to take something away from that particular section. So that is that part. The next thing I wanted us to do, so thinking about students and their identities, are either of you familiar with the Teaching Tolerance website? A little bit. Okay. So these are, let me close this, some examples of how we can affirm students' identities, and it's taken from Teaching Tolerance. There's just a wealth of information on there. Every time I go to the website, there's more and more in terms of resources, articles, lesson plans, just lots of stuff. You can filter by grade level, you can filter by subject, you can filter by topic, so much. I'm going to give you a chance to go to that in a little bit. But there's a couple of things that I included on the screen. So I'm going to let you just go ahead and, is this too small or can you read it from my screen?
I can read it.
Okay. Instead of me reading it to you, I'll let you just go ahead and read it. That way you can just read at your own pace. So then we'll talk about it in a couple minutes.
Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we encourage like cross-cultural like interactions and stuff with our students when there's like a lack of diversity in my community? Because like something I do in my class, because I remember when I told my students hola once, they were like really shocked that I knew any Spanish at all. So now like in my classroom, like we do Spanish, I say some things in Spanish. So that's my way of trying to allow them to interact with something different. But besides that, I don't really know a way because they lack it in their community. We don't have it at our school, so I don't know what to do.
Mhm. Hannah, do you have a response to that? You can say no. I'm not trying to put you on.
Well, I would say, yeah, you can speak Spanish. Like you can talk about other cultures, like traditions and holidays. Last year, I didn't teach just about Christmas. We taught about Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, Christmas. This year, we talked about Day of the Dead. That's one way just to talk about other cultures and their traditions.
Okay,
And Scholastic has resources.
Unfortunately, and I think this about other topics too, but unfortunately this is a topic that students will have to, for the most part, get exposure through like text, through, like videos or like materials like that, and through conversation, because it's not like we can learn about like Chinese New Year and then, like go spend time with people that are celebrating, like that's for the most part not something that our students have access to. But again, showing like our students don't have access to a lot of things. So how can they get it? The easiest means for us to do that is, like using your smart board if you have one, even just conversations and text, like books, your textbook, other people coming to talk about it if that's a possibility. But I think that, Capricia, honestly, it makes it all the more relevant because it's something that they're totally not exposed to otherwise, right? My roommate in the Corps is Asian, and like loved to cook food that she grew up with, right? Like she ate a lot of meat cooked in ways that students were not accustomed to, I guess, usually with rice or like in soups and things like that. And her students were always like floored by it, but in a way, she taught first and second grade, I guess. In a way that at first they're like, oh, that's nasty. And then she'd be like, whoever's like sitting next to her, do you want to try a little bite? And it was like almost rarely, like very rarely did anybody say no. And like almost always they were like, oh, that's not so bad, or something. But it was just like, it's different, so I don't like it, or it's different, I'm not interested. And so it was like her way of like, let me like help you experience this a little bit more, and not going to like the Chinese food restaurant to get exposure to this, which is like their only connection in her town, basically. But the other thing, any type of like unit that you can do that's connected to various cultures. I don't know if your basal or your literacy plans have that. Social studies is another great place for it. But is there a trend for either like holidays that we can discuss in which we can read different types of texts about this particular topic? Or within your basal, does it have other books that introduce different topics that you can like then dive into a little bit deeper? Again, not perfect because we're learning just through the book, but at least you can spend more time talking about it and exposing or even introducing kids to some of those things. The thing that I wanted to ask both of you is connected to this particular box. Just thinking about the texts that are read in your classroom, if you've paid attention to the background of the characters of those texts.
Well, I have, and a reason that I did one of my donors choose is I have a collection of chapter books, picture books, like everything, but all the characters are Black kids who come from like a bunch of different backgrounds. I even have some sci-fi books and things. So like I have this guy who like captures aliens or something. This little boy loves it, but he's a Black kid who does it, and we can't find any other books like it. And he's like, I want to find more because I read all of these ones. I'm like, I don't have any more. I'm sorry. Like, and it sucks that I really can't find any other like alien catching black little kids books for him.
But awesome that you found like, like that entry point too. I think that's awesome. Both of you nodded when you had said like, or when I asked like, is that a priority? Is that something that you've noticed? So that's like, I feel like you're 2 steps ahead of me at this point in my career when I was a teacher, of like realizing and, like making very specific choices about the text that we read because of who was in those particular texts. So I think that's super relevant. And in the same way that you're doing that to find texts that connect to your students, I think that's a way that you can find texts that don't connect to your students but aren't mainstream necessarily, that show other cultures, that show other experiences that maybe they're not exposed to just yet. Anything else stand out, or any other comments or thoughts from the things that are on the screen? Has race been, or even like skin color, been a conversation or a topic in your classrooms in a planned or an unplanned way?
Both, I guess. Kind of a funny story the other day. We were talking about, because one kid made a comment and a kid was like, well, our entire school is black. And a student who's dark skinned pointed to every light skinned person in the classroom, including myself, and was like, no, that person's white, they're white, they're white, they're white. And I was like, huh? And he was like, yeah, you're lighter than me, you're white. And I was like, this shows how binary they're used to things being sometimes here too, either you're black or you're white. And it's just really different, and like that brought us like a whole different conversation to have in class, which is also kind of cool, because other kids who are about the same shade as me, they were like, I'm not white, and like we had that whole talk, so that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
It's come up, my classroom is very diverse, so I have white kids, black kids, and Hispanic kids. So it comes up sometimes, yeah, and we just talk about it, usually unplanned, sometimes planned, but yeah, we talk about it if it comes up.
I think it's usually the unplanned ones that then you're like, oh, not things that I'm thinking about, or not things that I'm realizing. I taught kindergarten. We were doing color words. So like, we started with like blue, find things that are blue in the classroom. We got to brown, or no, we were on the word black. And one of my like very rambunctious kids said something, and like pointed at another kid. No, it was about white, sorry. And she goes, no, I'm not, I'm brown. And then I got in this whole conversation that she was light skinned, and the student that like tried to call her out for something was not. So then I went into, like me looking at my class in one way and my students looking at each other in different ways that I had no idea that they did, which ultimately led me to realize that my students who were darker saw that as a bad thing sometimes, or the ones that were, I guess, like verbal about it saw that as not a good thing, which took me a long time to figure out, like, how do I address this? Not in a way that like, I'm just going to tell you that that's not true, but how do we like bring to light, like, everyone's strengths, everyone's awesome, everyone like is successful in different ways, and like, does it matter like what color you are, like just like all of those kinds of things. And I think it was a very like eye-opening thing to realize that like 5-year-olds were like teaching me a whole heck of a lot that I was like not prepared for, but that I wish I had like planned better. So things to like, I guess, listen for and help acknowledge, like, students already have a perception of their own identity, and making sure that they don't grow up and like leave elementary school or even leave your particular grade level thinking something about their identity that that isn't true, I guess, or thinking that they're less than because of their color or because of their background or because they live with their grandparents, or like whatever that aspect of their identity is that they don't feel like is as good as somebody else. So obviously, like, there's lots of conversations that happen when kids are 6, 7, 8 years old, and just being mindful of what are we hearing and how can we like help students see that their identity is not a bad thing, for who they are. The last thing that I want us to do is, let me just get this part. We're going to spend some time just digging into the Teaching Tolerance website, just because I want you to, like, in the session, not have to do it outside of the session, to dig into a topic that you feel is relevant to your students, relevant to your classroom, or relevant to a topic that you want to spend more time with because of any number of things. So there's some ideas on the screen, but honestly, I want you to dig into whatever you feel like is most pertinent to your situation. So it's tolerance.org. I'm just going to kind of walk you through a little bit of how to get to maybe where you want to be here. So we're going to, at the very top, go to Classroom Resources. And then there's teaching tolerance lessons, lesson plans, some teaching strategies and things like that. I often spend some time with the lesson plans just for ideas. And then here you can filter. So what I think is really awesome, you can filter to like the lower grades. You can filter by subject, although I think there's some overlap. So what they have in history like is overlapped into other areas. So I usually don't filter there. But then you can filter by different topics. Like I said, identity today, academics in 2 weeks, and then discipline 2 weeks after that. Again, any topic that you feel like is important for your classroom, I want you to spend time with. So I'm not going to limit you there. Can
I ask a question really quick?
Mm-hmm.
You noted on the slide that one of your suggestions were teaching diversity and sameness. What category would that be under?
So this was taken from it was taken from a packet that was from Teaching Tolerance, and they had a couple of pages devoted to this. And I apparently like didn't save the link in the PowerPoint before when I've used it. And so I tried to find that link again and I couldn't. So I want to dig through more resources on my screen. I did type this in to the search is pretty good for teaching tolerance. And there are a few different things that come up. I think I just did the lesson. I can't remember what I was in. The lesson plan, or I was in the articles. I can't remember, but I'll try to find the resources that they had for that. I just don't have them for tonight. I'm sorry about that. So the other part that you could check out is the teaching strategies, which for some reason this is not showing the whole thing, but like here's exploring text through read alouds. And then it has all different things that you can select from there. So I would recommend probably the teaching strategies or the lesson plans. Again, you can go down so many different like rabbit holes doing this, but search for something that you feel like you're interested in, but that you also would potentially be willing or able to do as a lesson in the coming weeks before our next session. So whatever topic feels relevant for your class, it could be connected to your service learning project. It could also just be connected to conversations that are happening informally, and you want to do something a little bit more formal to address and talk about it. I'm going to give you, we'll say 10 minutes to just like start to do an initial search. At the end of 10 minutes, I would love to hear just something that you found or what you were digging into. If you're like, I haven't landed on one particular thing just yet, just share with us like kind of where you're at. And then we'll talk about those just for a minute and then we'll close out. So I'll give you some of your evening to continue doing some reading if you want. But any questions with that? I find it really awkward when I'm doing something on my computer. I have to like sit closer to like see it better. So if you decide to turn off your video because you're doing that, totally fine. I trust that at the end of 10 minutes you'll be ready to share something. So I'm absolutely fine if you don't have your video on during this time. Okay. Was that enough time to at least start digging into something? Okay. Would love to hear what you found, or would love to hear even what you were searching for or hoping to find something to be able to share with your classroom.
So I went ahead and searched for finding diversity and sameness because I think that's something my students need help with. And I found a few lesson plans, but I also was excited to see like lesson plans that really focused on empathy. I liked seeing that because while I mentioned earlier that some of my students have been able to show it for each other, it usually takes an extreme situation for someone else to be like, oh, I'm gonna help you, hold your hand or something. I kind of want them to show empathy more so on smaller things too.
Mhm.
And then one other thing I found that I'm probably for sure gonna use is they have a Valentine's Day lesson plan for finding diversity and sameness. And my school's really strict about us you following our grade level lesson plan, so it's hard for me to do other stuff. But on days like Valentine's Day and stuff, it's really easy for me to go outside the box. So that's a chance I'll have to do something like this.
That's awesome.
Can you send me that link for the Valentine's Day one?
I'll stick it in the box right now.
Okay, thank you. I was looking at an activity called Happy Faces because my students, sometimes they do not have a good day. And but I like the activity because it has them look for other people outside the classroom who aren't having a good day, and they give them a happy face. And they even give it to teachers, and I think that'll be good to teach them how to help people who are having a bad day and feeling sad instead of just being like, "Come on, you need to do this," and just being kind to them.
I love those ideas, especially because I feel like they're a connected to things that your students need, but also connected to like things that you want them to have or like continue to focus on. Um, especially as we think there's still a semester left. There's still plenty of time. So for the areas that you're feeling like we could definitely grow here, seeing that as an opportunity, not as something that like um, your students just don't have or can't get or obtain. So I also really like the Valentine's idea too, and like taking advantage of that time in your classroom as well. So we kind of just talked about those top priorities, next steps. I'm not going to make you share again, but uh, in 2 weeks, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about what happened from this particular topic. Um, it can be class wide, it can be maybe there's like a handful of students that you want to like spend some time affirming their identity or just finding out more about what they think about their identity, which I think is different depending on our grade levels too. So students are a little bit all over the place depending on their age, their exposure, etc. Um, but I want us to come back to this conversation when we start our next session. I put the assignment on that same page that you grabbed the Zoom link from. So this particular quarter, we're really focused on lesson level changes. And I think that this topic is a little bit more out of the box. So it's not like we're talking about writing and we can talk about what we're going to change in our writing instruction for next time. But I do think it's important to hold ourselves accountable to thinking about what's like the change that we want to see in our students. So what is the action that we're going to take over the next week and use that still as our assignment. So what I would love is either planning a lesson or having a conversation around one of the topics that you just mentioned. And then your assignment's going to be to submit a lesson plan or submit a lesson plan in preparation of that particular lesson or submit a video of you actually having that conversation or doing that lesson. So one thing that's new this quarter is that we heard your feedback and that people sometimes feel like the assignments just don't jive with their learning style, or their personality or whatever, which I totally get. So this time and every time this quarter, you'll have an option to either submit a lesson plan or submit a video, whatever works best for you. So, and you can vary that each time if you want. So that's the assignment for the next week. Thoughts or questions around that? Anything that I need to clarify?
Yeah, so just to clarify to make sure. So if I don't want to do a lesson plan, I can have a series of discussion questions and kind of host a discussion with my kids on camera and just post that.
Yep.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about, like their reactions. We'll talk about like my feedback, I guess, where that conversation went, where you want it to go, how we can continue that conversation through content even and through other aspects. If you do a video, I think people learned this before if they had to do a video, but I'll just like put it out there. If you do a video, it's best to like upload it to YouTube, have your settings like set like super private, like can't access, like whatever those are, unless you have the link kind of thing. And then put that link in a Word document. Just say, here's my video, and then upload your Word document to the assignment portal. Because so many people had trouble first semester trying to upload, and it was like files too large, like all that kind of stuff. So it's easiest to do that and just, put a link in a Word document. You don't have to put anything else even with that, and upload the Word document then. I think people found that was happening much easier and with less errors. So just trying to save you some time and trouble if you choose to go the video route. Also, make sure you do the pre-reading for next time. I don't have it posted yet, but I will try to make sure that it's posted by end of day tomorrow. So you have 2 weeks to do that instead of 1. So hopefully that helps. I'll also go through and try to really prioritize to make sure that it's a feasible amount, but that we still have a fruitful conversation from it. Thoughts or questions? Anything else? Okay, thank you both so much for sharing. I just really appreciate not having to like sit through awkward pauses or wait a long time in between people responding. It makes it much more smooth, much easier on my end too. So I really appreciate it. So have a wonderful evening. Let me know if there's anything I can do, and I'm excited to chat with you in 2 weeks.